Hey guys, this is Lisa, and part of the reason I started this channel was because I wanted to normalize conversations around love and sex, and I was hoping that as my audience grew, some cool people would help me do that. And so today I'm so excited because I have Rohan Joshi.
Oh my god, I'm cool people. I've never been cool people before.
Rohan
Or did all the other
Joshi.
cool people say no and now I'm stuck here? No, I'm kidding.
Rohan Joshi with me. Okay, let's start with what you're like in love.
What I'm like in love. Oh, I think what I am like and what I sort of will be like going forward in the future in love, because I'm currently single. But I think that's changed.
That's exciting.
Drastically. I mean, is it though? It's a combination of exciting, jaded, all of those things. But I think because I'm about 35 now, and the last time I fell in love, I was 25 years old. And I think the way you sort of love in your 20s and the way you love in your 30s is very, very different. Because I think you have a very romantic, idealized notion of what love is when you sort of fall in love in your 20s. Because I think all your cues that you take about love come from either pop culture or what you're told by relatives and family. And what I found is 9 times out of 10, family and relatives, instead of engaging with the reality of love, will just sell you platitudes about togetherness and forever and end of time and all of those things, without actually telling you anything about the fact that love is actually hard work.
It is.
On a day-to-day basis, right? It's hard work. It's not grand gestures. It's a lot of little things showing up every day, kind of like any other job in that sense. I think my definition of love in my 20s, the simplest answer here is my definition of love in my 20s was way more emotional. My definition of love in my 30s is a little more pragmatic. But I was very much into my sort of first proper relationship, which again sort of happened in my mid-20s. I dated through college, but I wasn't in any like serious long-term relationships all of through college. And of course, I went through that phase, explore all of those things, sexually late bloomer, all of those things. But when I did sort of meet the person I dated long-term, I sort of threw myself into it pretty emotionally. So did she. And yeah, that's pretty much how we played it.
Okay, so what do you think you learned about love, and how has that sort of shaped what you look for in a partner? You said you're single right now. How would you sort of, if you could, I know
Sure.
it doesn't work that way,
No,
but
of course.
if you could list out
Right.
the qualities that would make the ideal girlfriend, what would they be for you?
I think at this point, what I'd look for the most is just somebody who's willing to honestly engage in a conversation and the realities of the complications of love, as opposed to going into the relationship just idealistically, going that, we would definitely be together for forever, we would definitely be all of those things. I think right now what I'm looking for in a partner is somebody who would engage honestly in all of the complexities of love and all of the pitfalls of it, because I just feel like that would enable us to work better together at building a relationship. You're sold this thing through your life where you're told that a proper life or an ideal life or the well-lived life is one in which you find a partner and then build a life with that partner. But I'm coming to find that we live in a world and we live in a time where it is also possible to have an entirely complete, an entirely whole, an entirely emotionally satisfied, an entirely sexually satisfied, an intellectually satisfied and stimulated life that does not necessarily involve a long-term partner. I think I'm also at that age where I realize that, and this again sounds very idealistic and out there, but I realize that there's also a difference between having a partner your whole life and being able to parent a child with somebody. I think it's possible to make a distinction between the two. I think it is because, again, one of my learnings through life, just looking at all of the relationships in my life, and this is whether through their relatives or friends, and watching relationships that have worked and relationships that have not worked. For me, I think the single biggest learning has been that it is possible to be a terrible partner and a great parent, and vice versa. And vice versa. The two are not necessarily linked. You can be an amazing parent and a terrible partner. You can be a terrible parent and an amazing partner.
Do you want to have kids?
And I don't know. I'm 50-50 on that right now. I don't know whether I want kids or not because...
You're so lucky though that you're 35 and you can be 50-50 on it. See,
I agree.
don't have that fucking
Sure,
luxury.
Exactly.
So unfair.
I understand that I have biological luxury here.
Man.
I understand that I have a lot of biological privilege here coming into this conversation.
That's so lucky. So you said something
Okay.
that was interesting. You said you were a late bloomer sexually.
Yes.
Elaborate.
I did not... I didn't have sex for the first time until my 20s. And even then, it was extremely sporadic. Sexual activity was extremely sporadic, and and I also very much lived in a culture where there was very little way for me to access just information about sex. There wasn't really anybody to talk to. We didn't have sex education in school. It wasn't really a topic that came up with my parents. And it's not like they were regressive on the subject or not, but it was just, fact is, belong to a generation where that sort of communication was not just a thing that came up. So all the information I got about sex either came from discussions with friends that were woefully ignorant at the time. We all were. And then when I was about 15, 16 when the internet hit India for the first time. So I was kind of that sort of ground zero for that. I could call it ground zero for generation porn. That point at which puberty and pornography hit simultaneously. And there was no guidebook. And I think one way or another, and as much as it kills me to admit this in a world where I'm like, no, everybody should have access to pornography and all of that, I just wish that there had been somebody to contextualize that pornography for me. I wish there had been somebody to contextualize just all sexual information for me. Because at that point, I was just taking it in, and because on some level, it's not all pornography's fault. Let's face it, yes, the language and the visual dynamic of pornography can at times be extremely abusive, can at times be extremely sort of one-sided from a gender perspective. One of the things that I find, and this is darkly funny and a little sad about pornography, for example, is if you ever go to an ordinary porn site, the language is extremely harsh. There'll never be a video titled just, like cute couple having great sex where both orgasm. It's always chick drilled, chick nailed, girl gets pounded. So the language of pornography is inherently very violent. The power dynamic there is very violent. At the same time, you are also getting an exposure only to a certain very idealistic body type. And there is nobody to contextualize that for you and go, this is not what a woman's body looks like. This is not necessarily how a woman will respond to your sexual cues. This is not necessarily how a woman will respond during sex. And that doesn't necessarily mean she's having a terrible time. This is a little theatrical. And there's nobody to contextualize any of that for you.
And this is not even necessarily how a man's body will look.
Exactly, right? This is not what all penises look like. No. This is for want of a better word, this is a 1%er penis. This is a 1%er penis. This is all of those things. And because there's none of that contextualization, and while I'm speaking for myself here, I'm sure this is something that happens to a lot of people. There's a huge amount of dissonance from what pornography has taught you and what your actual first few sexual encounters and experiences are like. Because you come out extremely confused because you're like, that didn't look and sound anything like porn does. And you're suddenly left there with feelings of everything from inadequacy to confusion, to just a little bit of shame, to all of those things. While it also feels good, no doubt about it. But I think as a result of that, what happened is it makes sex very intimidating. It makes sex very scary. It's sort of because you're like, you've been told this is the ideal by pornography, which is a completely false ideal. It's like being told that if I work out, I will become like the Hulk tomorrow, right? Which is on some level, everybody needs to look at the Marvel movies and go, that's special effects. That's not what real life looks like.
Interesting.
What was your experience like? And again, I'm asking this because I obviously have no access to the female perspective on what sort of coming into the world of sex is like.
I actually never really watched porn. I don't know, mainstream pornography created for the male gaze, and I think maybe women will, lots of women might share this reaction to it maybe
Not
more
surprised.
than men do. It didn't do anything for me. And so I had actually a really wonderful...
That's fantastic, because that was going to be my next question. So was there less dissonance?
Weirdly romantic, actually.
That's really cool.
I mean, it's messy and it doesn't really work.
Sure,
as
of course.
a woman, I don't know, man, it's not as easy. It doesn't just everything doesn't just fit,
Sure, fair, absolutely.
It takes a while. It's not as easy as it looks
Learn. There are so many wise words being spoken now.
It's bound to be messy, painful, kind of like awkward. But I was really happy that the person I was with was a really, really respectful and extremely affectionate and like...
That's kind of fantastic.
Honest person, and so the feel of it was very like we're in this together, and it was kind of like cheesy and romantic. He'd gotten like strawberries and whipped cream and candles. And, actually, yeah, it was really cute. But it wasn't, we didn't have great sex. You know, the first time is not going to be great.
Atmosphere
Like,
was
come on.
all of it. No, it's not. It's not going to be.
Right?
It's going to be. It's one of those. It's kind of like watching an art film for the first time. Way more questions than answers at the end of it,
Exactly.
right?
And, I mean, as a
way
woman,
more questions than
like,
answers at the end of the
orgasm
experience.
It's like a whole. I mean, it's like you have to go to college for 5 years before you have a degree.
Yeah.
I feel like you have to be having sex for a while before
This
you
is-
realize
this is
as a
also
woman
true.
how
Yeah, yeah,
orgasms
yeah.
function. It's not like. You know, and then so
Yeah.
because you watch porn, you feel like maybe you have to scream and shout and pretend like it's fucking the best sex ever.
Same. That happened to me the first couple of times where I'm like, this person is not responding loudly. I must be terrible. I don't know. Maybe I was terrible. But yeah, huge dissonance between real life
versus
and
reality, right?
it's
Which have
absolutely
to be managed
expectations versus
better.
reality. It's basically like the perfect. This thing is like, have you watch Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, all right? And you know Karan Johar movie, and you look at the school in Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, and you go, man, I wish my school was like this. But the fact is, you live in India. Your school is not like that. This is a movie school, and you on some level have to recognize that this is not what real life school is going to look like. Sex is like that. You have the Karan Johar idealistic version of what you think it'll be, but in real life, it's little way more Anurag Kashyap.
Especially initially.
Initially, way more handheld Anurag Kashyap this thing than it
Anurag
is.
Kashyap is brilliant as well, right? So
It is, of course it is. Of
there's
course
like
it
much
is.
to be
But it's just the dissonance.
appreciated.
It's just the initial dissonance. And this is, of course, personal experience.
All I meant to say is that even though it might not meet your expectations of what you thought it should look like, it's not bad.
No, it's not
It's
bad at
pretty
all.
wonderful. It's just not what you were told it
In
should
fact,
look
the
like,
only
you know?
lament here is it would be, given that it's a confusing experience, it would just be nice if it were possible to come out and have somewhere you could turn to for context about that experience without feeling any shame about it. If there was a
Exactly.
parental figure or an authority figure that you could immediately go up to and be like, this happened. It was good but kind of confusing. What do I do with these feelings? Because when you don't have somebody to contextualize it for you, that feeling of inadequacy can go on for a really long time.
That's right.
That feeling of confusion can go on for a really long time. It can almost sort of maybe turn you off the experience, going that if this is what sex is, then I don't know that it's
Right.
something that I want to do. It's a little scary and all of those things, right? So I feel like the lament here is just really for that lack of machinery to contextualize information for people. And it just comes back to that point is I think we're finally lucky that we live in a world where there's content like this and just the ability to talk to peer groups on anonymous
Yeah.
encrypted platforms like WhatsApp.
I wish, I mean, my vision, my like dream is that we get to a point where you don't have to talk about this anonymously, you know,
Exactly.
where it's perfectly fine.
Like, which is why
Talk
I
about
feel like the
this stuff.
Sexpert column in the Mumbai Mirror is
Oh,
such a
Mahendra
huge this thing. And we
Vasa.
laugh at
Yeah.
it and it's funny at times, but just the fact that there is a daily column that addresses, and you know, sometimes people are like, are those questions fake? Are those questions real? Honestly, I don't care. Because even if some of those questions are fake, the smart thing that the column does is they will be about such prime basic sexual inadequacies that whether the question is real or fake, the learning that you get from his answer, for somebody who probably has no machinery to contextualize that information for them, I think is hugely important. Just being able to, like, just an answer where he tells a woman that it is completely normal for her to, that lubrication is a normal thing. It takes time for lubrication, that's a normal thing. Erections can be erratic, that's a normal thing. Man, sometimes just hearing those simple things really, really like eases people's minds, I'm sure.
For sure.
Because,
for sure.
yeah, and I think we need, like you said, way more of that.
Way more of that. Way more of that. Okay, question then, since
Yes.
we're talking about Ask the Sexpert and all of that.
Yes.
Why are Indian men so reluctant to use protection?
I don't know.
It's an ego thing, maybe. It's a masculinity thing, maybe. It's also a
Possibly,
total, a delusion about your own invincibility thing, maybe.
Possibly, and also confidence about your ability to pull out on time, which is the most misguided kind of confidence
can't-
on
it's
earth.
not-
Because, guys, orgasms are like Indian guests. They come without telling you. They just ring your doorbell. They don't inform you in advance. They're like your relatives. So you can say, I'll pull out in time or whatever, but that doorbell can really ring anytime. You have no idea.